When Barron Trump walked into a high-end restaurant, he didn't expect his MAGA hat to spark a public showdown. What happened next not only shocked the manager, but left an entire city talking. It was one of those golden Los Angeles afternoons, where the sun draped the city in a warm glow, and the air carried a hint of ocean breeze. The kind of day that made people linger just a little longer over their coffee, take leisurely strolls down sun-dappled sidewalks, or sit at outdoor cafes watching life unfold. Barron Trump, now in his late teens, had spent the morning lost in the pages of a book, savoring the quiet before deciding to step out for lunch. He wasn't in the mood for anything extravagant, just something good, something familiar, and so he chose La Raza, a restaurant that had become one of his favorites over the years. La Raza was more than just a dining establishment. It was an institution, a place where old money dined alongside new influencers, where Hollywood power brokers conducted discreet meetings, and where reservations were often booked weeks in advance. Its reputation rested not just on its exquisite cuisine, but also on its ambiance, refined, exclusive, yet unpretentious in its own way. Barron had been here before, many times in fact. He liked the atmosphere, the low hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the way the staff carried themselves with effortless professionalism. It was a place where he could blend in, enjoy a good meal, and, for a little while, just be another diner. But today, as he pushed open the sleek glass doors and stepped inside, there was something different, something subtle, but present. He stood out, not because of his last name, not even because of his towering height or the easy confidence with which he carried himself. No. What drew eyes toward him, what made heads subtly turn and conversations momentarily pause, was the bright red MAGA hat perched on his head. He wore it casually, without any apparent agenda. It wasn't a statement, at least not to him. It was just a part of his identity, something he had long grown comfortable with. But in a city like Los Angeles, where political sentiments ran deep, a hat like that wasn't just fabric and embroidery. To some, it was a symbol, a statement, a provocation. Barron didn't seem to notice, at least not immediately. He was greeted at the entrance by a hostess, a woman in her mid-30s with neatly tied-back hair and a polished demeanor that spoke of years in the hospitality industry. She smiled, professional but measured, and led him to a table near the corner of the restaurant. It was a good spot, quiet, slightly tucked away, offering a clear view of the room. He took his seat, thanking her politely, and reached for the menu. Around him, the restaurant carried on as usual. A couple near the bar murmured over their wine glasses. A well-dressed group at a nearby table discussed business in hushed tones, and waitstaff moved seamlessly between guests, refilling glasses and delivering plates with practiced grace. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the glances began. At first, they were subtle. A man at the next table nudging his partner, an older woman near the window flicking her gaze toward him before quickly looking away. By the bar, two waiters whispered, their eyes flickering toward him, then back to each other. It was small, almost imperceptible, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Barron, engrossed in the menu, didn't immediately register it, but slowly the awareness crept in, a quiet tension, an unspoken undercurrent that seemed to ripple through the room. And then the manager emerged, mid-40s, sharply dressed, with a presence that commanded attention. His suit was impeccably tailored, his hair slicked back with precision. He wasn't just the manager, he was the face of La Raza, the guardian of its exclusivity, the silent architect of the restaurant's carefully curated atmosphere. His steps were brisk, purposeful, his face tight with determination. As he approached Barron's table, his voice cut through the gentle hum of conversation. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We have a policy against political apparel here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." Barron looked up. His expression didn't immediately shift. There was no knee-jerk reaction, no flash of emotion. Instead, he simply set his menu down, reached up, and removed his earbuds, placing them neatly on the table. For a brief moment, silence hung between them. The manager stood firm, his posture unwavering. A few diners had turned fully now, openly watching. A couple near the entrance exchanged knowing glances, as if they had been expecting this. Barron tilted his head slightly, processing the request. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he said, his tone measured. Not defensive, not combative, just curious. The manager's lips pressed together. He gestured vaguely toward the entrance. "It's written in our code of conduct," he replied, though there was no visible sign confirming this anywhere in the room. "We want this to be a neutral space for all guests." A neutral space. Barron let the words settle for a moment. He glanced around, not in defiance, but in quiet observation. The other diners, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The staff, trying to look busy while stealing quick glances. The tension in the air, thick and unspoken. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He hadn't walked in expecting a confrontation. But now, here it was, unfolding in real time. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he said finally, his tones still neutral. "I'm just here for lunch." The manager's stance stiffened. "You need to take the hat off," he said, his voice losing a bit of its practiced smoothness. "Or I'll have to ask you to leave." Another pause. This time, the weight of the moment settled a little heavier. Barron sat still for a second, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, calm, almost thoughtful, he pushed his chair back and stood. "If that's how you feel," he said evenly, "then I'll leave." And just like that, it was over. The restaurant, which had been humming with quiet conversation only moments ago, fell into an awkward hush. As Barron gathered his belongings, he left behind an untouched glass of water. He moved with the same steady ease he had entered with, his expression unchanged, his demeanor unshaken. He walked toward the door, not rushing, not hesitating. The only sound was the soft creak of the floor beneath his steps, and the distant clatter of silverware as a waiter hurriedly refilled a glass. Then the door closed behind him, and inside the tension lingered, thick as smoke. At the bar, a young waiter leaned toward the manager, his voice just above a whisper. "Do you think that was a good idea?" The manager exhaled sharply, waving him off. "We can't make exceptions," he muttered. "If we let him stay, it sends the wrong message. This is my restaurant. I'll run it as I see fit." But even as he said it, something flickered across his face, something uncertain. Meanwhile, outside, Barron paused for a moment. The California sun bathed the street in gold, the warmth brushing against his skin. He adjusted his hat slightly, as if reaffirming his choice, and took a deep breath. He wasn't angry, frustrated maybe, but more than anything, he felt disappointed. He had always been taught to treat people with kindness, even when disagreements arose, and this moment felt like a betrayal of that principle. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began typing, first to his mother, letting her know what had happened, then to a few close friends. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He was looking for clarity. And what happened next would be bigger than anyone expected. Barron Trump stood his ground, his expression calm yet unwavering. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he replied, his voice steady, respectful but firm. The words hung between them, measured and controlled, but they carried weight. The manager, a man used to being in charge, held his ground as well. His gaze flickered, as if weighing the moment, deciding just how far he was willing to push. There was no immediate response, only a tightening of his jaw. "It's written in our code of conduct," the manager finally insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. "We want this to be a neutral space for all guests." Neutral space. Barron tilted his head slightly, his eyes scanning the restaurant again. The diners, the waitstaff, the quiet murmurs that had replaced the casual hum of conversation. A few guests pretended to be absorbed in their meals, cutting their food with a little too much focus, their gazes carefully avoiding him. Others openly watched, their expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment. Some looked sympathetic. Others, not so much. He could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on him, but he didn't react, didn't shift, didn't fidget. He merely let the silence stretch for a moment longer, considering his next words. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he said, keeping his tone level. "I'm just here for lunch." The simplicity of his statement made it land with even greater impact, because that was the truth. He hadn't come to make a scene. He hadn't walked in expecting controversy. He had simply wanted a meal, a moment of normalcy in a world that had never really given him the chance to be just another person. But the moment he stepped into this restaurant wearing that hat, normalcy had been stripped away. The manager, however, remained unmoved. His stance stiffened, his posture shifting ever so slightly, as if to reinforce the authority he believed he held in this situation. "You need to take the hat off," he repeated, this time with finality, "or I'll have to ask you to leave." For a brief moment, Barron said nothing. He simply studied the man in front of him, as if assessing something deeper than the words being exchanged. Then finally his decision was made. He nodded, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the moment, of what it had revealed. Without another word, he reached for his belongings. He didn't slam his chair back. He didn't huff or roll his eyes. He didn't argue. He simply stood. His movements deliberate, controlled. "If that's how you feel," he said evenly, "then I'll leave." And just like that, it was over. But the air in the restaurant remained thick with something unspoken, something unresolved. The tension that had been building didn't dissipate with his departure. If anything, it lingered, hanging in the silence he left behind. Barron picked up his jacket and phone, leaving behind his untouched glass of water, the condensation pooling slightly on the pristine white tablecloth. The restaurant, once filled with quiet conversation, had grown noticeably still. His footsteps barely made a sound against the polished floors. But to those watching, it felt like each step carried the weight of something bigger than just one meal left uneaten. The door closed softly behind him. Outside, the world was unchanged. California's sun still bathed the city in warm golden light. The gentle breeze still drifted through the air, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the occasional burst of laughter from passers-by. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the warmth settle against his skin. He reached up, adjusting his hat slightly, not out of defiance, but as if reaffirming to himself why he had worn it in the first place. He wasn't angry. Frustrated? Maybe. But more than anything, he was disappointed. Because it wasn't just about the hat. Not really. It was about the principle, about the way people treated each other. He had been raised to believe that kindness mattered, that respect was something everyone deserved, regardless of background, beliefs, or the slogans they chose to wear. And yet, here he was, on the outside looking in, simply because of what that hat represented to others. Inside the restaurant, the murmurs had returned, hushed but urgent. Some diners exchanged glances, leaning in to whisper. Others sat back, watching the manager with unreadable expressions. By the bar, a young waiter shifted awkwardly, his fingers tightening around the tray he carried. He hesitated, then finally leaned toward the manager, lowering his voice. "Do you think that was a good idea?" The manager exhaled sharply, adjusting the cuffs of his suit jacket. "We can't make exceptions," he muttered. "If we let him stay, it sends the wrong message." "What message is that?" Another staff member chimed in quietly. A hostess, the same woman who had seated Barron earlier. Her voice was careful, but there was something in her eyes, something questioning. The manager hesitated. "That we don't tolerate political statements," he said finally. "This is my restaurant. I'll run it as I see fit." And yet, even as he said it, something flickered across his face. Doubt? Guilt? He wasn't sure. But the moment lingered in his mind, refusing to be brushed away. Meanwhile, outside, Barron pulled out his phone. He wasn't planning to make a big deal about what had happened, but he did want to tell someone. First, he texted his mother, a brief summary of the encounter, then a couple of close friends. Nothing dramatic, just the facts. Then, without much thought, he tapped open his social media. A simple post, a quiet statement. Not out of anger, not out of spite, just as a reflection of the moment. "Do you think that was a good idea?" That's him. The waiter's hushed voice carried the weight of uncertainty, but the manager remained resolute. He waved his hand dismissively, shaking his head as if to brush aside any lingering doubt. "We can't make exceptions. If we let him stay, it sends the wrong message. This is my restaurant, and I'll run it as I see fit." But even as he spoke, an unease settled over the room. The diners, who had once whispered in curiosity, now shifted in their seats, some glancing toward the door as if expecting Barron to return, others exchanging silent looks of discomfort. The moment had passed, yet its echo remained, a question left hanging in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. Meanwhile, Barron walked away from La Raza, his pace unhurried, his thoughts a steady rhythm against the city's hum. A few blocks down, he spotted a small public park, a quiet retreat from the clinking of glasses and murmured conversations. A line of oak trees cast long, dappled shadows over wooden benches, and Barron chose one near the edge, where the city felt just far enough away. He sat down, exhaling slowly, then pulled out his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed a quick message to his mother, keeping it brief but direct. Got turned away from La Raza. Manager said no political apparel allowed. Heading home soon. He hit send and leaned back, staring up at the patches of sky visible between the branches. The situation still felt surreal, but more than that, it left him unsettled. Not angry, not hurt, just disappointed. A moment later, his phone vibrated. His mother's response was immediate. "You okay? Want me to call someone?" Barron smirked slightly, shaking his head before replying, "Nah, it's fine. Just thinking." But even as he reassured her, the question gnawed at him. Was he overreacting? Was the manager within his rights? It wasn't about the hat. Not really. It was about what it represented, about the divide that had woven itself so tightly into society that even a simple lunch could become a statement. He needed a different perspective. He opened his messages and fired off a few texts to close friends, Ever been kicked out of a place for what you were wearing? The replies were quick and emphatic. That's insane. They shouldn't have treated you like that. You handled it better than I would have. What's their problem? It's just a hat. The validation was reassuring. But Barron wasn't looking for outrage. He wanted understanding. He scrolled through his contacts, then called someone he trusted to give it to him straight. "Hey," he said when they picked up. "Hey, heard what happened. You good?" "Yeah," Barron replied, just trying to make sense of it. A pause. Then, "You know it's not really about the policy, right?" That guy wanted to make a point. Barron sighed. "Maybe. But let's say it was just about keeping things neutral. Where's the line? If I walked in with a different hat, would he have said anything? Or was it just because it was this hat?" His friend hesitated. "Honestly, it was probably both. Some people see that hat and think it means something about you before you even say a word. Right or wrong, that's the world we're in." Barron nodded, more to himself than to the person on the other end. It wasn't just about policy. It was about perception, about assumptions, about how a piece of fabric stitched with 4 letters could draw a line in the sand between 2 strangers. And that's when the idea took root. He wasn't interested in revenge. He didn't want a public feud or a media circus. But what if he could turn this into something productive, something that didn't divide, but instead brought people together? His grip on the phone tightened as his thoughts aligned into something clear, something actionable. He started making calls, his voice calm but laced with purpose. "Hey, I need your help with something, he said into the receiver, the first of many conversations that would set his plan in motion. By the time Barron left the park, the sky had shifted to a golden hue, the sun stretching shadows long across the pavement. But he wasn't walking away from the incident. He was walking towards something bigger, something meaningful. And soon, the city that had whispered about his hat would be talking about what he did next.